Hello guys, it's 899 here and welcome to today's video, and today we're going to be talking about our NRL tips and predictions for round 23 of the NRL season. Big matches obviously happening this week with a lot of context surrounding if any of these clubs are going to make the finals, and even some that could see the layout of what will happen for the wooden spoon race. Without further ado, let's get straight into it. Starting off on Thursday, we have the Melbourne Storm up against the Brisbane Broncos. Now, Melbourne are coming off a 16-10 win over Parramatta in, dare I say, not the greatest of matches. Obviously, the conditions were terrible, and they still do have Jerome Hughes out, but they were just able enough to get over the line when it really needed to, which shows about the top level of good teams purely because of, they can play terribly but still get the job done. Their opponents, the Broncos, are coming off a smashing 60-14 win over a very depleted South Sydney Rabbitohs, but now the Broncos currently see themselves still within the top six. A win for the Storm could have them tied level with the Canberra Raiders, obviously until a later result, whilst the Brisbane Broncos with a win... the Brisbane Broncos with a win can see them having 30 points and could be as high as 4th depending on other results. Now, I think this is going to be a very big, important match. It's really going to be of which team shows up more, and I'm going to go against the grain here. Sorry, Will. I'm going to say that I think the Broncos are going to get the win in a very close one. Now we go into the Friday games where at 6 PM we have the Newcastle Knights taking on the Penrith Panthers. The Knights are coming off the bye while the Panthers are coming off a second half almost capitulation, but just about getting the job done to getting the field goal and to forcing Golden Point and then getting the try over the Gold Coast Titans. A win for the Knights could see themselves get out of the bottom 4, whilst a win for the Panthers could also see them enter the top 4, again, depending on really what happens in the Broncos game the day before. I'd like to come out here as a Knights fan and say, I think we can be up to the task, which I generally think we can be because we've been in the contest for all of our matches for most parts of the game, but this is Penrith who have been on fire. I cannot tip the Knights. I think Penrith are going to win handily. Unless there's no trainer that runs in front of Gagai. Now we go into the 8 PM game on the Friday, and we have the Canberra Raiders taking on the Manly Sea Eagles. Now the Raiders are coming off a shock loss to the Dragons, whilst Manly are coming off a pretty substantial loss to the Sydney Roosters in granted terrible conditions, but the Roosters, in a very important match, got the job done. A win for the Raiders would keep themselves momentarily on top of the NRL ladder, while a win for the Sea Eagles would keep them right on the points battle with the top 8. But because of their for and against, it would keep away because the Dolphins have a massive for and against currently in their favour. I think Raiders are going to need to wake up to themselves because they realise, okay, we can lose, so we need to kind of stay on our game. But I do think at home they should be able to get the job done. Now we're going to the Saturday 3 PM kickoff, and we have the St George Illawarra Dragons taking on the Cronulla Sharks. The Dragons, as mentioned in the previous game, got the win over the Canberra Raiders in an 18-12 victory, which had a bit of feeling into it, to dare I say, whilst the Cronulla Sharks are coming off a 20-point win over the North Queensland Cowboys, which has sort of systematically ended the Cowboys' finals hopes. I mean, there is obviously still a shot, but, it's pretty much more so like they kind of need a miracle now. Kind of same like other teams like the Knights, which are in their situation. A win for the Dragons can get them up to 22 points, which would try to close the gap down to 4, depending on other results, but it's probably more so going to be likely the Dragons are going to make the finals at this point, but they could still, be competitive and stay out of the bottom 4 race. Whilst a win for the Sharks can see them jump into the top 4, depending on results between the Warriors, the Panthers, and the Broncos, which this match obviously a bit of a rivalry, so it's going to be a bit tasty, a bit feisty. But I'm going to say that I think the Sharks should be able to get the job done because this is where they start actually, showing, oh yeah, we're actually an alright team when we try. Now we go into Saturday at 5:30, and honestly, probably one of the biggest games of the round. It is the Dolphins taking on the Roosters. 8th versus 9th. This could have a lot of implications in terms of how this final race will go. The Dolphins coming off a last-minute win over the Warriors in New Zealand, whilst the Roosters are coming off a win over the Sea Eagles to keep themselves really locked in on trying to push for the finals. So with 8th versus 9th, the Roosters can pull away, but with a win, they still would be behind the Dolphins on the ladder in 9th place, but they'd be tied on the same competition points. A win for the Dolphins will see them on 28 points, which, depending on how the round goes, could see them in the top 6. It's all on the line here for the Roosters. They kind of need to win this. I'm not saying if they lose, they're out of the finals race, but it does make their final charge a little bit harder. And despite Herbie Farnworth being out, I'm going to say in a very close one, I think the Dolphins win. Now we go into the Saturday 7:35 kickoff. It is the Bulldogs against the Warriors in a top 4 clash. Now the Bulldogs are coming off a loss to the Tigers where, yeah, there was obviously the result happened, but unfortunately an obscene Arabic gesture was the main talking point. Whilst the Warriors, as previously mentioned, heartbreakingly losing in the last minute to the Dolphins. A win for the Bulldogs will have them at 36 points, potentially tied with Canberra, obviously depending on what happens. So they could see themselves tied for first place. Whilst a win for the Warriors will help strengthen the sort of gap that needs to happen with the top 4 because they've kind of dropped a couple of games in the last couple of weeks, so they kind of desperately are looking for a win. Big match between these two. There's going to be a lot of feelings because this could be potentially a match we see down in September, maybe even October. And I'm going to say that I think at this integral point of the season, I think the Bulldogs will get the job done, and I think the Warriors are going to start needing to switch on, unfortunately for them. Now we go to the Sunday ticket, which, honestly, it's the best looking day in the rugby league calendar. Starting off at 2 p.m, we have the Gold Coast Titans up against the South Sydney Rabbitohs in a bit of an early precursor to a spoon bowl. Unfortunately, it can't be decided here, but, you know, it could have some implications. The Titans are coming off almost completing one of the greatest comebacks in rugby league history, falling ever so short to the big fucking chin bloke. Whilst the South Sydney Rabbitohs did a pretty decent valiant effort despite only having 17 players, but then, you know, it's the whole, we had a lot of injuries. Now, both teams currently tied on 16, with South Sydney currently last with 4 and against. It is important the Titans get this win here to get to 18 points because South Sydney have a bye. That is going to be very important for them in the terms of the spoon race. Look, I'd like to see South win this because the amount of injuries they've had, to be honest, with everything that has happened, it almost makes me not want to rag on them for getting the spoon. Almost. But I just think the Titans are just going to be up for it and ready for it. Home at the Gold Coast, I think the Titans will get the job done. And finally, we have at Sunday, closing the round, it is the Parramatta Eels up against the North Queensland Cowboys. Now, Parramatta are coming off a very close loss to the Melbourne Storm, which honestly, I think they played pretty decently, with Melbourne playing down to their competition, but just couldn't get over the line. Whilst the North Queensland Cowboys are coming off a 20-point loss to the Sharks, which just kind of put a bit of a pin in their finals hopes. The Cowboys desperately need to win if they want to avoid this whole top 4 kerfuffle because of that draw, which is looking very important for them at the moment. However, a win for the Parramatta Eels could actually see them leapfrog into 20 points away from the Knights and the Cowboys. I think this match is going to be quite interesting to see how both teams are going to play out. Do the Cowboys possibly finish in the bottom 4? I personally don't see it, and that's why I just think that the Cowboys are going to get the job done and get the win over the Parramatta Eels. So those are the predictions here for this round. A few upsets, but you know, you gotta make it interesting. Let me know what you have in the comments below. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you all later.